Hello, I am Jimmy Krell. I am a dermatologist here in Birmingham, and I have specialized in psoriasis for most of my career. I've been in practice a little more than 26 years, and I have championed and enjoyed treating psoriasis patients for all of those years. And we are now upon World Psoriasis Day, which is October the 29th, and we thought that it would be very nice to bring in Tiara Pennington, who is Miss Alabama. Part of our platform this year is to let it be known that this disease is out there, and we are both on our own mission to make sure that as many people as possible know that there are really good, safe, effective treatments out there for patients with psoriasis.
I'm Tiara Pennington, Miss Alabama 2019, and this is something that I have championed for. As Dr. Krell mentioned earlier, my social impact initiative is volunteering with the National Psoriasis Foundation and Psoriasis Take Action. I started this back in 2013 because my mother and my uncle both suffer with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. And unfortunately, in my lifetime, I possibly could have psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis, which is a very scary thought because it's so complicated, this disease, which you know, Dr. Krell. It's so complicated in so many different ways. There's 5 different types of psoriasis, and you can have a combination of all of those different types, which is really scary. And just watching my mom throughout the years, just simple things like going on a field trip with me and not being able to keep up, and we're having to wait on her and not fully understanding at the time why she couldn't keep up. And she's had a period of time where she's been in remission, but now she's struggling again. And it's just a very scary thought to know that right now I'm living my life, I'm Miss Alabama, having fun, and the next day something could change. So you know, Dr. Krell, different things can trigger psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis.
So let me give you a little bit of a history of where we are in terms of psoriasis treatment. On average, people develop psoriasis for the first time in their mid to late 20s, and on average, people develop psoriatic arthritis about 10 years after that. And during my training from 1990 to 1993, the treatments for psoriasis were minimal and pitiful. We used to put patients in the hospital for weeks at a time, and we would wrap them up with ointments, and twice a day they would get phototherapy on the floor of the hospital. Old phototherapy units, before the new ones were developed, had a higher risk of skin cancer. And then somewhere in the late 90s, there was a light bulb manufactured by the Philips Corporation that was what's called a narrow band UVB bulb, and that was a big breakthrough because it worked better, less burning, and there was much less risk of skin cancer with the treatment itself. And then in the late 90s, there were a group of medicines called TNF inhibitors, tumor necrosis factor inhibitors, that came to the marketplace, and a lot of pharmaceutical companies jumped on board and created those medicines. And all of a sudden, the whole treatment of psoriasis changed dramatically in the early 2000s when these drugs started to get approved for the use in psoriasis. For many, many years, patients would come to the dermatologist with widespread psoriasis, 60%, 70%, 80% of their body covered, and the dermatologist, who was not very skilled or quite frankly not that interested in psoriasis, would give the patients this size tube to cover their entire body for a month, and all it did was make them more depressed than they already were with their disease. They would see another dermatologist, get some of the same thing, and it wasn't until the early millennium of 2000, 2002, 2003, when we started to get drugs approved for psoriasis, that all of a sudden these patients who had just depressing large amounts of psoriasis that wouldn't get better no matter how many doctors they saw, no matter how many times they put the creams on, all of a sudden now they were clearing up. And it has been a wonderful decade and a half for the treatment of psoriasis. And I'd like to hear your experience with that and your telling people about that.
But I can definitely attest to my mother telling me different stories about dermatologists didn't know what she had for the longest time, which we all know that psoriasis patients need to be treated immediately to make sure that their disease is better treated and they don't have to go through the problems of depression and other comorbidities that come with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. And because of that, that was very detrimental to my mother. And one of the reasons why over 80% of her body was covered in psoriatic lesions, because she just wasn't going to the right dermatologist. And it wasn't until she went to a rheumatologist that they were able to diagnose her with psoriasis and then told her that she had psoriatic arthritis. And unfortunately, the reason why she got psoriasis was back when she was 33 years old, which was at the time that she gave birth to me. And you know, Dr. Krell, that it's stress and other events that can happen to your life that can trigger psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. So my mom lived a perfectly healthy life until she was 33, and then her life has changed drastically from there. And so that's why my mission as being Miss Alabama and just being in the Miss America organization is to really let people know that not only adults suffer with this, but children as well. So back in 2016, I had the opportunity to speak in front of the FDA Board of Directors, which at 17 years old was pretty amazing and one of the highlights of my life, because I was a voice for my mother, someone who had been voiceless for a very long time, and tried to tell people, you know, I just don't think you're diagnosing me properly, and had to go through this step therapy laws where she tries and fails multiple medications before she was given Cosentex, which has been able to help her in her condition. Well, I'm so glad to be here with an expert today, because these different biologic medications, which end up working really well with someone who has psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, these injections can have very harsh side effects to them.
They can, but fortunately,
Right.
we're lucky that most do not.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. And so that was just my take on psoriasis and letting the FDA kind of know my story, my mother's story with psoriasis. And since that time, they approved Enbrel, which is approved for children. So I'm so glad that that was approved for them. Just recently, before I won Miss Alabama, I went to Capitol Hill for the National Psoriasis Foundation Capitol Hill Day, which another wonderful experience, and someone who is a political science major and wants to incorporate all that I learned in school with psoriasis. This gave me a legislative part of it, and to try to be an activist for those on that level, which was incredible to be in Senator Doug Jones' office and different representatives up in Congress. So that's another moment that I won't ever forget, and I will continue until we finally find a cure. But I'm so glad that technology has advanced.
The fact that we have safe, effective, affordable medications is almost like a cure. There are mass misconceptions out there that the disease is contagious, that the disease is not treatable, the disease is infectious. And one of the things that we need to really get out there and tell people, hopefully by means of this video, is that the disease cannot be passed on to anybody that you touch. Unfortunately, it can be passed on, as you know, from one generation to the next. But fortunately, only about 30% of psoriasis is actually inherited. The other thing that's worth noting is psoriatic arthritis is a progressive disease. And so if you let psoriatic arthritis go untreated, the joints will continue to deteriorate and degenerate, and the spacing in the joints will become smaller and smaller, and there will be more and more problems. So it's super important that we get our patients with psoriatic arthritis, even more than psoriasis. The psoriatic arthritis patients need to be treated as early as possible with one of the medicines like the ones you mentioned, Cosentex and Enbrel and Humira, that are known not only to treat the active psoriasis, but are known to inhibit what's called the radiographic progression of psoriasis. Because if you don't do anything, there are really good studies that have been done, mainly in Ireland, but in other places, that show that in the absence of treatment with psoriatic arthritis, even within 1 year of the diagnosis, in the absence of treatment, those joints will degenerate fast. And so the earlier we can get people on treatment for psoriatic arthritis, the better it is. I'd like to mention one thing that you mentioned earlier, and I did too, and that is the comorbidity of depression. So psoriatic arthritis is the most common comorbidity of psoriatic arthritis. About 30% of patients over multiple studies have shown to have will eventually develop psoriatic arthritis. But depression is one of the most devastating parts of psoriasis. I have actually had at least 2 patients over the course of my career, fortunately before the biologic days, who were suicidal. And fortunately, this patient was smart enough, hopeful enough to have persevered, and he eventually got into my office through seeing several dermatologists, and we were able to put him on one of the very first biologic drugs. It's actually not on the market anymore, the drug that he was on, but it dramatically turned him around. It literally cleared up his depression, and it is one of the most important things, because you can imagine if you go from one doctor to the next and they keep telling you have nothing we can do, nothing we can do, nothing we can do. And we're trying so hard to tell those patients there is something we can do now. And there's many of these companies that make these medications have lots of programs for patients that don't have insurance or have low income. And the income levels to get these drugs are quite high. So in other words, you can make as much as, in some of these companies, $90,000 and still qualify for free drug. And I don't know what the numbers of what the amount of money is for under the poverty line, but it's pretty high. But you can definitely make $50,000 or $60,000 or more and still get total access to free drugs from almost every single company that has biologic agents. So you may not know or need that because your family hopefully has insurance, but as you talk to people, and you may be talking to people of low income, and they, in many of their areas of medicine, might have thought that, well, they can't get drugs, but they really can. They just have to, if nothing else, save up the money for an appointment with somebody who's a specialist, rheumatology or dermatology, and they should be able to get free drug even if they don't have insurance.
Right.
That's really important. The National Psoriasis Foundation, I'm so happy you work with them. I think they're a great organization. They do wonderful things for psoriasis. I encourage every single one of my psoriasis patients to join the National Psoriasis Foundation. I personally give to them, and I help to raise money, as you do too, for them. I think they do a lot of things for patient advocacy.
They do.
One of the problems we have in psoriasis is that, as you mentioned, there are a lot of step-through edits to get to the medicines you need to get to. I think it's horrible that a patient is required to go on some very toxic medications through insurance before they're allowed to get much safer, much more effective medications. And the National Psoriasis Foundation is desperately trying to reduce those number of step edits, as you probably know.
And one of the things I love being a student ambassador for psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis is I have the opportunity to go into universities and try to get hooked up and get more information to those who are interested in the medical field and in their majors, to talk to them a little bit more about psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. So they can be volunteers already with the foundation, and so when they go out in their careers, they can be experts like Dr. Krell and be ready to be a champion for those suffering with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. And so every day I love seeing more and more about people really starting to understand about psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis more and more every day. And we definitely want to be able to do it here in the state of Alabama with experts like Dr. Krell and with others that I come in contact with, really just being open about their condition, because someone who does like to take pride in their look and appearance all the time, my mother's one of those types of people. It's hard to come out and kind of be like, I am hiding something and I'm wearing this clothes. Psoriasis is not contagious, but awareness is, and I've definitely seen that already through my year as Miss Alabama, and I'm not going to stop after this year.
Well, that's great. I hope that we can convince everybody who sees this video and everybody that doesn't that it is a disease that's treatable, it's not contagious, and that if you have been inadequately treated, it's time to find somebody who can treat you well.